Hi everyone! So today we're going to be talking all about how to care for Aglaonema plants. Now Aglaonema is the scientific name for these plants. More commonly though, they are referred to as Chinese Evergreens. This particular variety right here is a Maria, so I call her Maria for short. And this is a broad genus of plants with a lot of different varieties. Now, a lot of them have green with some silverish kind of variegation on them in varying sizes and shapes of leaves, similar to what you're seeing here, but some with way more silver, way bigger, broader leaves. And then we also have a ton of different color varieties and options across the Aglaonema species. Pinks, reds, chocolate tones. There really are just so many beautiful plants to choose from. But let's start off talking about the growth pattern for these plants. Now, some Aglaonema grow in what is considered like an upright pattern. So sometimes we will also hear this referred to as a clumping plant, which basically means you could start out with just one plant like this right here, but then as that spreads around, you'll see another one pop up here, another one pop up here, and it'll just start to fill in the pot, which is kind of nice in my opinion, because you don't have to do anything special to get the plant to get fuller and bushier. Now, before we go any further in this video, there is a severe PSA announcement that I need to make for you guys regarding these plants. So I talked about this in our last care guide video on Rephotophora tetrasperma, and I am going to mention it again, although what I'm going to say this time is going to be a little bit different. If you've never heard of this, you're probably going to be left going, what? So we talked in Rephotophora tetrasperma care guide about fabric plugs that are common when you buy those plants nowadays, and to remove them immediately when you buy the plant. For whatever reason, it is now the common thing to put what I refer to as plastic cages, so plastic cage plugs, if you will, around the roots of Aglaonema plants. I have not seen one in the last 8 months, and every time I see an Aglaonema, sorry you guys, in the store nowadays, I shove my finger down that pot and I feel for those plastic cages, and I have not found a single plant in 8 months that did not have them. So when you buy an Aglaonema plant, when you get it home, repot it immediately. You are going to have to remove all of the substrate. You will see what I am talking about. I have some footage that you're probably seeing right now of when I discovered it on one I bought a while back. But these plastic cages are around these roots and they prevent the roots from growing to their full ability. So you really need to get in there and remove them. And depending on how rooted the plant is, this could be a sort of easy process, or it could be really difficult. In my case, it was kind of complicated. But get as much of the substrate off as you can so that you can get to those cages. You're going to have to kind of just carefully cut through the slits and cut sections off. Typically, if it's very well rooted, that's what you're gonna have to do. If it's not super well rooted, you might be able to just slide it out without causing damage to the roots, but you need to get those cages off. If you do not, you are going to start to see a decline in your plant at some point. You're gonna be wondering what's going on. You're gonna reach out to me and I'm gonna be like, did you ever check for those plugs? And you're gonna say no, and then you're gonna go find them. The plant will recover, but better to just remove them up front. But let's talk about the type of soil that's best for these plants next. Since I just told you, you're gonna have to remove all the soil as soon as you buy it, it seems crucial to tell you now what to pot it back up into. So these plants are native to tropical areas in China where they live on the forest floor. So they want a soil type that is going to retain a little bit more moisture than something, for example, like a monstera that is more of an epiphytic plant and needs a chunkier, airier soil. So I personally prefer to put my Aglaonema into what I refer to as my forest floor mix. Once again, if you are not familiar with my video where I talk about all my soil mixes and how I make them, I will link that down below for you. However, these plants are pretty unfussy, and if you don't want to deal with buying a bunch of different soil components to make that mix, I think they would do fine in my basic mix as well. And my basic mix is just 5 parts premium potting soil to 1 part perlite. So if that's kind of the standard that you have on hand for your plants, that would work well for these. Now, once again, in general, they are used to being in an environment where they've got like a lot more moisture than epiphytic plants around their roots. So let's talk about watering next. These plants I probably shouldn't even tell you can. You can let them dry all the way out, you guys, but in my experience, if you let them dry all the way out, you're going to lose leaves. Even if you like water it the day that it finishes drying all the way out, odds are you're going to have 2 to 3 minimum of the oldest leaves are already starting to turn slightly yellow, and they're not going to recover from that. They're going to go completely yellow and you're going to have to remove them. So I do not let mine dry more than 3/4 of the way out before I water it again. You honestly probably could water it when it's only halfway dried out as well. They do like to be kept a little bit more on the moist side, but they have pretty robust roots. They're not like robust like this guy, but they're not so fine that if you let it dry out too much, they're just going to desiccate up and you're not going to be able to recover the plant. So what I mean by 3/4 of the way out, actually she needs to probably be watered. So if you guys can see, I've probably gone a little bit too long, but I would be looking for this much of the soil to about here to look dry, this part to still look a little bit dark. Hopefully you guys can see that it doesn't really look dark, so I probably should have watered her a few days ago, so she'll get watered after this, but that's what I mean by that. And that's probably also why this leaf is starting to droop over here. So I might end up losing that leaf. That also might account for why this is starting to turn yellow here. So once again, I highly recommend just letting them dry no more than 3/4 of the way out before you water them again. I'm trying to see, okay, here. I wanted you to see kind of the size of the roots in there. So they're not super fine. We're not like peperomia root fine, but we're not super thick either. So that's why they will like survive if you do accidentally let them dry all the way out. But once again, you're gonna lose some leaves in that process. But let's talk about light next, because light is a big thing with these plants because they are highly marketed as low light plants. Once again, low light plants is like a marketing thing, you guys. Plants can be low light tolerant, but once again, that means they tolerate it. It doesn't mean they actually like it. And a lot of plants, like they'll tolerate it for a while and then they won't tolerate it. So I did originally have Maria living in my office directly in a north-facing window that actually has, during the summertime, a small tree that obscures it slightly. She did fine there, but she honestly wasn't thriving. So about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, I relocated her into my bedroom next to a west-facing window and slightly offset from my giant southern-facing windows. Now, these plants, in my experience, do not really like to get super direct sun on them. That can cause issues, so you want to make sure that light is indirect unless it's just a little bit of direct morning sun. Most plants will tolerate, you know, an hour or so of that morning light that's not super harsh. But where she is now, she gets way more indirect light and she has really taken off. She also had started getting a little bit leggy, and that's the other problem with if you put these plants into lower light because of the way that they grow. Once again, when they get, I guess, let me show you over here first. So this is new growth right here. So you can see there's just a few leaves and it looks like they're separate from each other, not on like one stalk or stem, if you will, but they actually are on one underneath the soil. So as that point that I just showed you matures, it'll start to look like this and the leaves will all just be coming off of this central point. Now you can see I've lost quite a few leaves off of this one over here. This is one of the oldest growth points or growth shoots in this pot. And so a lot of this is stuff that I lost when it was starting to get leggy living in that north-facing window in my office. Once again, the plant was alive, it was fine, but it was kind of stretching out a bit and it really has just done better in the higher light. So that can happen with Aglaonema. Maria here is actually a pretty thick-stemmed Aglaonema. Some of them are not as thick-stemmed and you may find that you have to stake them up if they do start to get really leggy like that. So in my experience, yes, people will say they're low light tolerant, but they really do better in brighter light. Just my 2 cents. Now, if you do get them into too bright of light, once again, just like with almost any plant, you might start to see paling of the leaves. They won't look as deep of a green. If it is getting direct harsh light, you can get those burn marks or white kind of bleached marks looking on parts of the leaves. So just keep an eye out for that. Once again, always gradually acclimate, I want to say Aglaonema again, acclimate your plants into brighter light and just kind of observe how they're doing. Move them closer and closer to wherever you want to put them. If they are not doing well, pull them back or try them somewhere else. Now, as far as temperature goes for these plants, they like a range of about 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of us keep our houses within that range, so you should be okay. The only real thing about temperature, you guys, why do we bring it up in care guides? You know, I probably ought to emphasize at the beginning of this care guide and the last care guide I did that conditions in everybody's homes are going to be slightly different. And sometimes we don't really explain why we're bringing up certain things. So let me talk about temperature a little bit more, because we all know that most of us are probably keeping the inside of our house between 65 and 80, maybe a little bit below 65, but a little bit below, as long as it's not for an extended time period, it's not going to like harm most of your plants. But the reason that I bring it up is because a lot of people don't think about the fact that when you put a plant like this next to a window, especially in the summertime, especially here where it's been like 110 degrees outside, the window, the area around the window gets very hot. Very, very hot. And lots of times people will mistakenly think that the light is damaging their plant in those situations, when in the reality is it's the heat that is damaging the plant. Now there's a very easy way for you guys to know if it is heat or cold that is causing an issue with your plant. The side of the plant that is getting the heat is the only side that is going to be affected. So if you are seeing weird things going on this side, it's not getting any direct light, but it's getting bleached out, it's getting bleach mark spots, and you're like, it's not getting direct light. She said I would only see that if I get direct light. Not true. You can see that if it is just getting too hot. So be mindful of things around your plant in your personal environment that might cause a shift in temperature. Once again, I mention it in every care guide, direct drafts from AC or heat is a big one, but also just consider how hot or how cold in the winter is getting around a window where you might have your plants. You may find that you have to relocate them depending on the time of year. But let's talk about humidity next. Once again, we talk about this in every single video. Every plant that we own probably wants higher humidity than most of us have in our house, and that's just because in their natural environment, this plant is probably getting 70% or above humidity. However, this is a highly humidity tolerant plant, you guys. It doesn't care. Aglaonema are really unfussy when it comes to humidity, and most things, honestly. The thing I think they're most fussy about is actually the fact that people say they're low light tolerant and you can put them in low light and they don't really particularly want to be in low light. But other than that, they really are pretty tough, you guys. They're pretty tough as nails. Humidity range, once again, in my house goes between 30 to 65 mostly. Sometimes I hit 70 at certain points in the summer, and totally fine with that. Now, if you do have higher humidity, if you live somewhere super tropical, just remember you might want to have a fan going when it is super humid in there at least once a day, a couple times a day, just to keep airflow going around your plants so that you are less likely to have any kind of fungal or bacterial problems start to develop on the leaves. But in general, this plant is not highly prone to bacterial or fungal issues. When it comes to pests, these plants actually have fairly thick leaves, you guys. They're not like crazy thick, and some varieties are thicker than others, but thicker leaf plants tend to be more resistant to pests because pests want to be able to puncture the leaves to suck out the insides of them. So they're going to go for your thinner leaf plants. So my experience, oh gosh, knock on wood, my wood floors, knock on wood, I've never had a problem with pests on any of my Aglaonema. I think mealybugs would probably be one of the biggest ones you might experience. Spider mites, if there's not a thinner leafed plant somewhere nearby, because if there is, they're going to go for that thinner leaf plant first. And then thrips, because thrips just seem to like everything, and yeah, no thank you on the thrip front. But if you do find you have pests, as usual, just isolate the plant, give it a good wash down to wash off as many of the pests as possible, treat it with your pest spray of choice, repeat that process every week for at least once a week for at least 2 weeks. I highly recommend going at least 3, maybe even 4, just to be on the safe side, depending on how bad the infestation is. If you do like to use beneficial bugs, that is always another great option. And just repeat the process as much as you need to get it under control. I do get the question a lot of, should you repot in that situation? If it is really bad infestation and you have reason to believe that they've laid eggs in the soil and stuff, it wouldn't hurt. So go ahead and do it. But let's talk about fertilization next. Now, with this plant, I do water at least once a month with a liquid fertilizer, just a balanced liquid fertilizer of NPK 10-10-10, 20-20-20, something like that. Mix it in with my watering can when I water my plants, and I just do it to the instructions on the bottle, you guys. I have never had a problem. I will link the particular fertilizer that I use in the description below for you. I've always followed the directions. I've never had a problem. I, however, do not water more than once every 2 weeks, and I only water once every 2 weeks in the summer when the plants are growing more rapidly. Now, honestly, I have not been on top of doing that this summer. It's been a stressful summer for me. So this plant's only been getting it once every month. But also this plant is flowering like mad right now. I don't know if you guys can see right there, but that is what the start of the flowers on this plant will look like. They're coming in all over the place in here. I cut them off because the plant is just going to put all of its energy into those flowers, and typically it will sacrifice older leaves with the more flowers that come in. So if you don't want to lose a bunch of your older leaves, just snip those flowers off as they come in. It is not going to do any kind of harm to your plant. But yes, in general, not super heavy feeders. So as long as you're doing it at least once a month, like I said, you should be okay. Now, as far as repotting goes, these plants don't typically spread their roots around crazy fast. You're probably only going to need to repot them maybe once every 2 years. I repotted, let's see, I'll flash up on screen for you when I last repotted Maria. And as you can see, she's not got like a ton of roots spreading around in here. There's a few starting to hit the edge. So in general, you're not going to have to repot them that often. Just wait until they get root bound. They do want to be quite root bound before you repot them. And then as always, just take them up only one pot size larger. Make sure you're using the same type of substrate again. If you have any reason to believe that you need to replace all of the substrate, you can try to remove it all. But in general, I still stand by the don't mess with the roots if you don't have to situation. So if there's not some kind of crazy pest issue that's been going on or anything else weird, and you can just leave the roots how they are, just set it into that bigger pot in the same type of substrate, and you should be good to go. But let's talk about propagation next. The easiest way to propagate them is going to be by division. I don't know why I just set that down because I'm going to need it to reference for you guys again, so let me pick it back up. So basically what I'm saying with division on these plants is, as we talked about, there's all these different shoots in here. So basically all you would do, and typically you would be doing this when you are repotting the plant, you would just separate these out from each other, pot them up as separate plants, and then you're good to go. Now, when you are doing this, and I think I'm going to record a video here soon for you guys on how to divide plants, because I've got quite a few that have to be propagated by division that are just, they've just overgrown their pots. I don't have bigger pots to put them in, so I think we're going to have to bust up some plants here soon. So you will hopefully be getting a video in the next few weeks showing you exactly how to divide the plants. But in general, I've said in the past, it's easiest to kind of just make one clean cut through each side of that plant that you're trying to separate and pull it apart. You can actually try to unravel roots. You don't necessarily have to. For example, the plant I showed you earlier that I had, the Aglaonema that had the plastic cages on it, I just cut straight through. Actually, I tried to cut straight through and I didn't realize the plastic cages were on that plant and I hit the cages. So it wasn't as clean of a cut as I would have liked to make. But even then, I potted those plants up and they all did just fine. So you can do that if you really want to try to like just unwrap the roots and pull it apart with all of the roots still attached on it. You can. You might tear some roots in the process. So just be aware though, regardless of how you're doing it, the plant that you actually separate and the mother plant may go through a bit of a phase after that. They may throw a little bit of a temper tantrum. It's probably not going to be too bad. You may just see they look a little bit droopy for a few days and then they start to perk back up. As long as you're putting them in an appropriate size pot when you separate them, and you really just want to put them into something that's not like, it's just barely bigger than the root system on the plant that you separate, they should be fine. You can pretty much just start caring for them immediately like you would the mother plant, but there may be some drooping. There may be a little bit of leaf loss, 1 or 2 leaves for that period where they're kind of adjusting to you having done that. But the last thing I want to talk about, as usual, is toxicity. And unfortunately, once again, these plants are toxic. This is another plant that Theo took a nibble out of when I first brought him home. But once again, just like with most of the toxic plants that we talk about, if your pet or a child takes one bite out of it, typically they're going to be okay. You may see that they actually throw up that one bite, but in general, the things that are in these plants are just highly irritating. They will make their mouths like irritated and red. You know, hands will get irritated and red from the saps and things inside of these plants. So most people and animals will just recognize, okay, that wasn't fun right away and leave it alone. However, if it's an ongoing problem, then definitely relocate that plant so that it is out of paws or hands reach. If they do consume a large portion of the plant, immediately take them to a doctor or a vet to get them checked out. They should be okay. Honestly, you guys, I know we say it's toxic, and a lot of people in their brains immediately go to one bite equals my dog or cat is gonna pass away. It's not gonna work that way. Even if they eat a large, if they eat the whole plant, the odds of that happening are like pretty slim, especially if you get them to a vet right away. But that is everything I had to share with you today on how to take care of lovely Aglaonema plants. I hope you have found this video helpful. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Aloha!